votes either in the General Assembly or the Security Council, and we thought it important that we provide you with an opportunity to perhaps engage with us on South Africa's approach to the conflict in the Ukraine up to this moment, particularly with respect to the positions that South Africa has adopted. As I've said, you'd be aware that yesterday in the General Assembly of the UN, a resolution was adopted which says that Russia should be suspended in its membership currently of the Human Rights Council. The resolution received a 2/3 majority in the 193-member General Assembly, with 93 countries voting in favor, 24 against, and I think, DG, I'm right, 58 abstaining, not 56. 58 abstaining. We also abstained on the resolution. This, you'd be aware, is the third resolution since the 2nd of March, tabled on Ukraine at the UN General Assembly, and it's the third that we have abstained on. I wish to point out very clearly that as South Africa, we are not indifferent to the suffering of the people in Ukraine, nor are we indifferent to the conflict that is underway there. We are deeply concerned about the continuing conflict. We had warned in earlier statements about the loss of life, that war is not good for anyone, and we are extremely worried at the deteriorating humanitarian situation. We believe that as a matter of urgency, there must be a cessation of hostilities, which in our view would be the first step toward providing a comprehensive response to the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding. We continue to stress as South Africa that dialogue, mediation, and diplomacy is the only path to end the conflict. And we noted yesterday in the explanation of vote that many member states are increasingly joining this view. As we stated in our explanation of vote yesterday in the General Assembly, wars end when dialogues begin, and wars endure when there is no dialogue. We are witnessing tectonic shifts in global affairs, particularly since the Russian Federation used force without sanction of the UN Security Council, which is the body that would sanction such action, in its entry to Ukraine on the 24th of February. We also are seeing global shifts through the use of the General Assembly as a voting forum rather than the Security Council, where decisions on peace and security are taken. This, I think, exemplifies a rather unfortunate development within the United Nations family. Global power relations are being realigned in response to the war, and we're seeing great volatility in the global economy. These developments have had a direct impact on our country as well as on many developing countries throughout the world. Our country, countries on the continent, and many others are affected by this conflict. All of them have sought to assert their independent, non-aligned views on the matter of this war underway. We have resisted in our responses, becoming embroiled in the politics of confrontation and aggression that have been advocated by the powerful countries. Before each vote, every foreign minister throughout the world is called by the various, for want of a better expression, protagonists. And we are asked to vote one way or the other. And we have been clear that we adopt an independent view as to how we vote. We cannot be directed by anyone as to how we should vote on behalf of South Africa. We have said we believe the aggressive discourse, the name-calling, and the use of the General Assembly for passing resolutions that add further criticism doesn't add to the resolution of the problem. It's not assisting, it is merely expanding the range of hatred and conflict that we are observing from afar. As one commentator said this morning, constantly poking a bear that is injured merely serves to make that bear more angry and more reckless. We've promoted peaceful resolution, and we've called for dialogue and negotiation, genuine dialogue and negotiation. As I said yesterday, this approach is in keeping with all members of the non-aligned movement since the formation of NAM in 1961, when developing countries on the continent and in Asia committed themselves to maintaining independent foreign policies and extending a hand of friendship to all countries that sought to reciprocate that friendship. This approach of the non-aligned movement was a way to balance our national interests when our priority was to maintain robust trade relations with many countries across the world and across the political divide then of the Cold War. We believe this independent approach, this approach of friendship, is as valid today as it was then. And that is why you would have noted in the General Assembly debate that all the members of NAM called for diplomacy and negotiation, each one in their statements. Our non-aligned position doesn't mean that we condone the military intervention of Russia in Ukraine. We believe that this intervention is in violation of international law. We've always opposed violations of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states, and we don't choose which member state. Any violation to us is an infringement of the UN Charter and its core tenets. We have also decried the humanitarian disaster that has resulted from this military incursion. And we've called for the urgent opening of humanitarian corridors and the provision of aid to the civilian population, which, as usual in war, bears the brunt of suffering when violent confrontation breaks out. We have held these views on the core principles and values of the UN Charter and on humanitarian support with respect to Palestine and many other countries where sovereignty is threatened. One of our concerns as this awful conflict ensues is that there appears to be a lack of balance evident in the manner in which the United Nations is being utilized today. We believe there needs to be a consistency in the approach of the international community to all countries that violate international law. When Israel launched sustained offensive military operations against the Gaza Strip, killing hundreds, flattening homes, burying civilians under the rubble, and devastating the well-known dilapidated infrastructure in such a small and densely populated area, the world failed to respond in the same way that it is now responding on Ukraine. We don't see Palestinians as different from Ukrainians, but the way that the world community is reacting, it suggests that Palestinian lives matter less than the lives of Ukrainians. And this is something that concerns us, and we hope that we will see the United Nations acting with as great vigor by the powerful member states on Israel, on Morocco, and others who infringe the sovereignty of nations. We hope that in future, military aggression will be met with sanctions, isolation, and a divestment campaign for all who infringe, not some. We have been strenuously pointing out that current approaches are serving to strain relations further. We have been stressing that the international community must focus on finding a sustainable solution. We don't believe it will be found in isolating one party or seeking to bring it to its knees. We don't want to go down the route that followed the Treaty of Versailles. Constructive solutions focused on addressing the humanitarian situation and promoting peaceful dialogue remain imperative. Our President conveyed to all key stakeholders that South Africa stands ready to be in support of a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, with the intention of bringing the violence to an end as speedily as possible. We have stressed to all our friends throughout the world that we believe negotiation is possible even now in the most difficult of conditions. And we have stressed that we believe this is the route that should be followed. Some of our friends have pointed to the efforts made by their particular presidents who are members of NATO. We have suggested maybe we should look elsewhere. We should look at other leaders who may be the key interlocutors that help us to walk and work toward peace. We know that there are some who oppose our call for peace and negotiations and who continue to hold the view that conflict will somehow solve the problem. But we are afraid that there'll be more deaths, greater humanitarian suffering, and many more abuses of the civilian population of the Ukraine. So we call for an end to the war and for the beginning of genuine negotiations. And this is the
Good morning, Minister and your team. It's Kylie Kumalo here from SABC. Minister, just to get your remarks once again. Okay, so just to get your reaction again. So yesterday you spoke about the double standards that you have seen in terms of the response with other international violators, the treatment where, of course, we've seen a raft of sanctions imposed against Russia as opposed to how other conflicts have been treated. So if you may just reaffirm that position once again. And maybe just a quick one, Minister. Do we know at this point when will President Ramaphosa have perhaps a telephonic chat with his counterpart from Ukraine, President Zelensky? Thank you.
Good morning, Minister, and to your officials. It's Karine du Plessis. I'm freelancing for everybody, Business Day. I have two questions. The one is that you said negotiations can start when there's been a cessation of hostilities, or what we need now is a cessation of hostilities. And I note that you don't talk about a withdrawal. You first talk about the cessation of hostilities. Why hasn't that happened? Why does it seem to be so difficult to get to that point? And you might have suggested the answer to that, but I just want to be clear. And the second question, this resolution of yesterday, could you perhaps just talk to us about the origin of the resolution? Because I heard that there's a belief that, I think it's at the UN Watch that drafted the resolution, an NGO, but I'm not sure. Somebody else said it's a rumor, and it was based on the Libya resolution of, I think, was it 2011, based on that draft. So maybe can you just, or perhaps the ambassador is closer to the resolutions, enlighten us on that. Thank you.
I don't see any other hand. Oh, over there. Okay, let's start there. We'll come with you.
Thank you. Turkmen is a Turkish journalist. Minister, the conflict is, Crimea is the central to Ukraine crisis from my perspective and historical perspective. And Kremlin said, if you recognize Crimea, we will stop this war. So do you think, and America doesn't want, especially America doesn't want peace, negotiation or dialogue, and it seems America is trying to weaken Russia in Ukraine. And it's very interesting, Russia and America, they do not target each other in Syria, we see. America is in the northern Syria and Russia is there, southern, they never target each other, but they target in Ukraine. So what do you want to say about the Crimea, as the Crimea is the hosting the biggest Russia naval is Crimea. So Russia will never ever leave Crimea. So I want to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, so looks like there's more hands. Maybe let's take this round and this one.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for the questions. Kailise, I think I did say that one of the things we would like to see is consistency in the approach of the international community to all countries when they violate international law. You would recall, for example, the killing of young boys in the Palestinian territories. There was hardly a resolution, hardly a peep in the United Nations. You'll recall the events of April 2020 in the occupied territories. There was no call for sanctions. You would recall that land has been raised, taken over, with illegal settlements built. You have a new election of a prime minister who indicates that he will continue to proceed with the building of settlements. There is no concern of a breach of sovereignty or territorial integrity. So we are saying you cannot have the United Nations utilized in a partisan manner. It must be a body that equally stands for human rights for all, for its status to be respected. This has to be a basic condition. And this is something we have reiterated more than once. On the phone call, we await a response. This is still on our timetable and agenda. I don't know why there isn't a cessation of hostilities, but I think there's a very serious breach of trust in the whole context, and to some degree Ukraine and the civilian people of Ukraine are the victims of a huge breach of trust and a concern about security on the part of Russia, as well as a concern about its own freedom and integrity on the part of Ukraine. We need negotiations that help to resolve that level of insecurity among the parties. It has to be addressed. It cannot be neglected. It's a long-standing historical problem that must be confronted in real terms. So we're very, I must say, encouraged by the work that President Erdogan is leading, but you'd need to really have many more interlocutors around the table before there would be a settlement that is reasonable and that results in the cessation we're looking for. But we do believe that we should all urgently advocate for a cessation of hostilities, because the human toll is just terrible. So while we're not saying negotiations for cessation next, but we're saying that genuine negotiations with a respected interlocutor. We cannot understand, for example, why the Secretary General of the United Nations is invisible in this huge international crisis. As to the origins of the resolution, we've heard all sorts of stories that an organization, an NGO, drafted the original resolution, and then it was appropriated by a member state and presented to the body of the General Assembly as the resolution, I believe, of Ukraine. But its origins are somewhat suspect from what we're hearing, but this is, for me, it's speculation and rumor. I don't have any facts as to its origin. I wouldn't be, clued into those deliberations. I'm also concerned about the call to withdraw Russia from the Human Rights Council, because I think when a country that is party to such conflict and hostility is placed at the margins of international bodies, the level and opportunity for increased lack of accountability is just too open for us. So we are very concerned that the more marginal you become, the worse the offenses might be. On Crimea, I think a Russian writer has just written a really fascinating article that goes back thousands of years on the history that is linked to this crisis. And certainly, Crimea appears to be at the heart, but there are other regions, smaller regions as well. And so all of that would need to be open on the table and be resolved. I think that leaders of the world can certainly come together, either on a unified platform with a respected neutral arbiter to assist, to have genuine deliberations on what could be a settlement that all parties would be satisfied with. I don't know if my colleagues, the DDGs, ambassadors, wish to add. I draw on them. They brief me, so yeah? All right. Okay.
I think the good was her and then you did the rest. I correct.
Hello. Good morning. Slinda Lomasigane from ENCA. I just wanted to ask exactly where is South Africa when it comes to mediating? Are there talks with our Russian counterparts? Have there been any conversations with the president of Russia at all? And I would just like to hear from the ambassadors that were on the ground exactly how is the situation now? Do we still have any South Africans left? People who chose to stay, as well as the situation with the students who were brought back. What's happening with those guys? Because we know, of course, they want to continue studying, but it seems rather difficult for them to do it here. Is it possible to get them back into the EU? Thank you.
Good morning, Minister and Ambassadors. It's Ndayezo from Power FM. Minister, just two quick questions. What would be your response to the criticism, especially from political commentators, that the Minister and the President are not speaking with one voice on this matter? There's been suggestions that you seem to be more upfront on South Africa's stance, while it appears the president is taking a more of a diplomatic stance? That's the first question. The second question is, if South Africa is in agreement that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is a violation of international law, it would then suffice that it's a violation of human rights. Would it then not make sense to express that view by voting with the resolution? Thank you very much.
So Karen, you'll be the last.
Thank you so much, Clayson. I have a question. It's about another war. I hope I can slip it in here. It's a little bit closer to South Africa. Ethiopia, the Amnesty International report that came out, I think was last week, or was it earlier this week, detailed gross human rights violations in Ethiopia. And I know the President mentioned it yesterday, which is why I'm asking about the Ethiopia. I just want to know how are engagements going there in terms of trying to get dialogue going in Ethiopia? Thank you. And I'm sorry for hijacking your briefing, Clayson.
Just give it to her. She's got one last quick question, then we go.
Thank you so much. Nokanya Mtambo from Jacaranda FM. Minister, just to jump on to Ndayeto's question, can we just get a sense of what consultations take place when the decisions of abstinence, for example, are arrived at? Who do you consult with? And just how do you arrive at those? And how does Dirco deal with voices that disagree with the current approach that South Africa has taken? Thank you.
All right. I'm going to ask the ambassadors to just come in on the ENCA question. In terms of any mediation, South Africa has indicated its readiness to be of assistance. Should we be invited, of course it would be by invitation, either by the Secretary General, which would be our preference, that the UN leads on this, but we've indicated that we are ready, and we do have the experience, the institutions, and we believe the individuals who could play a very important role. On the matter of students, perhaps Ambassador Maqituka could speak to that. Ambassador? Oh, okay. All right, they're going to come around. All right, then I'll continue with the others and then they'll come back. Well, you know, I've been amused about this one, that the President and I are not at one. Unfortunately, the Foreign Minister and the President work closest together in any country. And if they don't, then you have real problems. And we work very closely together. And I do seek the President's advice on all matters where necessary. There are areas in which I have to make decisions, but I would always speak to him. And on the key issues, such as abstaining from the vote, we did speak and agree on the position that we would take. So there's no difference of opinion, and I really don't know where that comes from. I saw it, I was overseas, and I saw some weird article that the President, I had said something and he didn't agree with it, and it was, you know, anonymous source or whatever, you know. So I don't know about anonymous sources, but I put it out there. But we speak. I do talk to the President on these matters, and would be guided by him, because sometimes I may be a bit more you know, tough or whatever, and so he does serve to guide all of us. Well, I had to ask ourselves, we had to ask ourselves, the resolution, does it advance the objective we'd like to achieve, which is peace? And as I said at the end of my reply to the last question, I'm worried, and I indicated this to the various foreign ministers who've called me to ask us to vote in support. I'm worried that if we place Russia outside of institutions of global governance, we're almost giving a license to say, do what you will. We've now given up. There's nothing more. So our reflection on what is proposed is to what degree is it positive in advancing the cause for peace. So it may look very good to vote yes, but does it advance? Does it help? And this is the challenge. We can be very popular and vote yes all the time. Vote the way everybody thinks we should vote. Yes at this point, no at that point, and so on. But all the time, the driver for us is we have to have peace, and part of that settlement will include Russia. You're not going to be able to exclude them from settling this matter. And we don't think that what is being done is helping to draw them in toward a settlement for peace. You can't use the United Nations instruments as tools of war. They are there to achieve peace and security for the world. So that would be why we would abstain. On Ethiopia, we've had discussions with the AU facilitator because we can't displace the AU. And again, we've indicated both to Ethiopia through our president in discussion with his peers that South Africa stands ready to be of assistance. We've offered assistance of either accord or any other negotiating and peace resolution non-government actor in South Africa to be of assistance. We've said we'll make funding available should that be necessary. So again, we're ready to assist. We are glad that the humanitarian corridor has now been established. We understand from President Obasanjo that there are regions that are not getting the aid, and we need to look at that. So we'll pursue that discussion with them. On Jacaranda, that's a really interesting question, actually. A lot of consultations take place. We would not decide without talking, for example, to our permanent representative in New York. And of course, we must talk to the president, who's our lead on foreign policy. But in the end, it's me, because I will communicate the decision, and if there's a need to respond on it, I would be the one who would respond. If the matter affects colleagues such as our ambassador in Ukraine, will also say, listen, we're thinking this, what do you think? Or this is coming up, do you have a view? We also speak to our colleague Ambassador Nkosi, who's in Geneva, where we also UN institutions like the Human Rights Council are located. So we'll say to him, listen, there's this coming up. We're thinking of approaching it in the following way. What do you think? Then we have our own experts in the department, such as Mr. Lahero sitting back there, Laura was sitting back there. So it's a whole team of people, and after we've collated everything, we then would consult the president, give him the information we've gathered and the various perspectives, and we would then, as South Africa, adopt a decision. From time to time, I talk to my colleagues in SADC and say, we're thinking this way, what do you think? Or they call me, we're thinking this way, what do you think? At times broader than SADC, the continent, and so on. Our friends also in the north call us from Europe, United States. Actually, I've never had so many calls from foreign ministers since February than I've had since February, almost every day. So it's a wide set, but you don't do it alone. You can't, because it's too complex. Foreign policy is so difficult that you must have as many, I think, advisory notes to help you to arrive at a determination. Sometimes Ambassador Nkosi will say something, I say, no, I don't agree. Then I go to somebody else and say, What do you think? And that ambassador will say no, but we think, of course, he's correct, you know? So it's a whole process of consultation, but in the end, the president also has to be party to it. It's a very exhausting job, and I hope when you all take over, because we are on the way out, that you will enjoy doing it. All right.
I think you wanted Ambassador Groenewald.
Yes, Ambassador Groenewald and Ambassador Makretuka. I don't know what's wrong with the microphones.
Yeah.
Why don't you
Shall I start?
keep then you be clearer? Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister.
Oh, let's use this one. I'll move it there. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Excellencies. Colleagues, good to see you in real life. We've spoken on the phone to many of you over the last month and so on. With regards to to the security issue in Ukraine. With regards to the security issue in Ukraine, of course, you will have seen in the reports that it is still a very, very dangerous situation in specific areas of Ukraine, the southern areas, and of course some of the intensification of conflict in the eastern parts of Ukraine. So it's very dangerous. The reports I'm getting from other ambassadors in Kiev itself seems to be that it's a little bit calmer, but it's not just about the war situation in Kiev. There are other factors as well. You know, the release I said yesterday of prisoners, people in the streets. We're a little bit worried about looting and so on. So it's not as if the security situation are just changing overnight because people are moving to or the military is moving to a different area of the country, and so it's still very dangerous. With regards to the South Africans that are still there, we are aware and in contact with about 5 families. It's not just individuals, it's in one case a family of about 10 people. And all of them are safe. They are in contact with us and tell us that they at this stage don't want to go out. What we have shared with them is to, in cases, is to be sure to have a plan. Because what we have learned with any war, and we've had it as an embassy, luckily, is the fact that you need to have your evacuation plan. You have to have plan 1, B, 3, a number of plans, because things change all the time. And I think it's been very helpful for the families. There's one family that is in Kherson, which is an occupied area at this stage. And so they are not on the Ukrainian side anymore, they are on the Russian side of things, but they tell me that they are safe at this stage. And so we are monitoring it. So it's absolutely by choice that they are still there, but they know that they can count on us for assistance.
Thank you very much.
I think it likes to be held up.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Minister. Colleagues, I have to say that from the Russian side, we have got no issues of security. There is no humanitarian issue with the South African community, i.e. the students, and those South Africans who are working in Russia, like your teachers who are everywhere in the schools in Russia. There are no issues. We have got a plan in the mission. We have got a database of those South Africans who have registered their presence with the embassy. Our website is open for those who are not registered to register their presence in the Russian Federation for in case there are issues. Otherwise, presently, life goes on. All our students, we've got about 895, Minister, if my figures are correct, South African students all over the Russian Federation. They are in touch with the embassy. They know what they should do for in case they are facing challenges. So that would be my response, Minister, in relation to students at the Russian Federation. Thank you.
Thank you. The matter of what happens to students who've come back home is more complex, I think, because they were undertaking a range of different studies, and many of the students were in private institutions, not even public, nor had many of them been sent by government. It tends to be private. Families are funding them, or they have scholarships from donors. We have directed the students to the Higher Education and Science and Innovation Department for advice and assistance. But it is very difficult, especially for those students that are very close to graduation. If you don't have equivalence in the programs, it's very difficult to assist, and we don't know when Ukraine would reopen and institutions be ready to receive students. So it is a very difficult situation, but we've asked our colleagues in higher education to advise, because it's really not our domain. We don't have the full information on that. Yeah.
Colleagues, just to add to that, it's indeed correct that the students have indicated that they, especially the ones that wanted to complete their studies, we have evacuated 52 students from Ukraine, of which 51 are in studying medical sciences, so doctors and nurses and all of that. We have had a meeting about a week ago between the Department of Higher Education and the deans of the medical schools in South Africa. And they have agreed, after a consultation with the students, where most of them have indicated that they would like to continue their studies in South Africa. But our ambassador in Budapest, in Hungary, has also negotiated a program with the government of Hungary to take some of the students that want to go back there to complete their studies there, and that would form part of a bursary scheme as well. So we are looking at quite a number of ways to address this issue, and it's an ongoing process. Thank you.
I now respectfully close this briefing. I have colleagues who are addressing ambassadors, and I'm sure they were very astounded when I walked out of the room. Just as they were beginning to speak, it looked quite embarrassing. So I have to go back, and I thank you very much for having come this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
How are you? Fine, thank you. I just asked a question that I didn't quite clear.
I'll give it to Linda.
Thank you.